I don't know where to start. Maybe at the beginning, maybe at the moment when my life, as I knew it, began to crack. My name is Ryan. I'm 35, married to Emily for 8 years, and until recently, I thought I was living the life every man dreams of. But then little things started to feel off. It began with Emily staying late at work more often than usual. She's a marketing manager and has always had a demanding job, so I didn't think much of it at first. But lately, her excuses felt rehearsed. There's a big campaign coming up, she'd say, or we're behind on deadlines. And then there was the gym. Emily has never been one to care about fitness, but suddenly she was hitting the gym 3, sometimes 4 times a week. She said she wanted to feel healthier, and I supported her, but something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just her schedule that changed, it was her attitude. She became distant, her laughter less frequent. We stopped having those deep, late-night talks we used to enjoy. Instead, she'd come home exhausted, shower, and retreat to the bedroom without even saying goodnight. I wanted to believe it was just stress. That's what I told myself for weeks. But there was this nagging feeling in my gut, this weight that wouldn't let up. I couldn't shake the thought. Was she hiding something? I need advice. I don't know if I'm overthinking or if my intuition is onto something. What would you do if you felt the person you love most was slipping away from you? I couldn't pinpoint when Emily began slipping away from me. It wasn't one big moment, but a series of small, almost imperceptible changes. At first, I chalked it up to life being busy. I mean, who hasn't felt stretched thin now and then? But now, looking back, it feels like I should have noticed sooner. It started with the gym. I still remember the day she came home wearing brand new workout gear. Tight leggings, a bright sports bra, and that kind of confidence she hadn't shown in years. She looked incredible, don't get me wrong, but Emily had always rolled her eyes at gym culture. She hated the idea of sweating around strangers and found it boring. So when she started going regularly, I was surprised but supportive. Good for her, I thought. Maybe this was her way of finding a new passion or getting out of a rut. Then came the late nights at work. She used to text me when she was working overtime, sending little updates like, "Don't wait up," or "Bring me something sweet for when I get home." But now, her texts were short, almost cold. When she got home, she barely said a word. If I asked how her day was, her answer was vague. Busy, you know how it is. No details. Just the wall. There were moments that gnawed at me, like when I found her gym bag by the door one evening, even though she said she'd gone that morning. Or when she missed our dinner with friends because she had to stay late, only for her to come home smelling like perfume, stronger than her usual kind. She claimed she'd spritzed herself with a sample at work, but my gut told me otherwise. And then there was Tom, my best friend since college. He'd been acting off too, distant, distracted, and dodging my calls. Tom's always been my go-to guy, the one I could talk to about anything, so his sudden radio silence felt like a betrayal. I couldn't help but wonder if these two things, Emily's behavior and Tom's avoidance, were somehow connected. Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe I'm turning molehills into mountains. But damn it, when your wife starts pulling away and your best friend stops picking up the phone, what are you supposed to think? I need to figure out what's going on before I drive myself crazy. The doubts clawed at me, relentless and growing louder with every passing day. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was just being insecure, reading into things that weren't there. But it became harder to ignore the signs. The strange coincidences piled up like bricks, each one heavier than the last. One night, Emily came home late again. She claimed she had been at the gym, but her workout gear was perfectly folded in the back seat of her car, not damp with sweat as it should have been. When I casually mentioned it, she snapped at me, accusing me of being too controlling and nitpicking her every move. It wasn't like her to lash out like that. Emily had always been calm and level-headed, so this sudden defensiveness felt calculated. Then there was the day I stopped by her office to surprise her with lunch. She wasn't there. Her assistant hesitated before saying, "Oh, she's out running errands, I think." The way she avoided eye contact screamed that something wasn't right. Later, when I asked Emily about it, She fumbled with her words and quickly changed the subject. And Tom, my best friend, the guy who once crashed on my couch for 3 weeks after a breakup, was now avoiding me. He stopped coming over to watch games, canceled our usual Saturday coffee runs, and gave vague excuses whenever I reached out. It wasn't like him to ghost me like this. The worst moment came during a neighborhood barbecue. Emily had promised she'd meet me there after her gym session, but she never showed. I called her, and her phone went straight to voicemail. When she finally came home hours later, she casually mentioned being caught up at work, as if that were an acceptable excuse. But something didn't add up. Her story changed when I pressed her. First it was a client meeting, then it was a deadline. I stopped asking. Her lies weren't even well thought out anymore. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was going on, something she wasn't telling me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I might find, but I had to know. The next day, I made up my mind. I was going to follow her. The decision to follow Emily wasn't an easy one. I felt like a terrible person for even considering it, like I was betraying the trust we'd built over 8 years of marriage. But then again, hadn't she already broken that trust? If I didn't figure this out, I'd lose my mind. It started that Thursday evening. She told me she'd be working late again, finalizing some big project with her team. I kissed her goodbye at the door, pretending everything was fine, but as soon as she drove off, I grabbed my keys and followed her at a safe distance. My hands were trembling, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. She drove across town, weaving through familiar streets until she hit the highway. At first, I thought she might actually be heading to her office. I felt a pang of guilt for doubting her. But then, just before the exit for her company, she took a different turn, a route leading nowhere near work or the gym. My throat tightened as I kept my distance, tailing her car through an older part of town. Finally, she pulled into a quiet residential street and parked in front of a house I'd never seen before. A light came on inside, and the front door opened. That's when I saw him. Tom, my best friend. He stepped out onto the porch, smiling as Emily walked up the steps. My stomach dropped. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Then, as if to confirm my worst fears, she leaned in and hugged him. Not a quick, casual hug, but a slow, intimate embrace. One that lasted too long. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, my best friend, the two people I trusted most in the world. Together. I sat there in my car, paralyzed, staring at them through the windshield. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was witnessing. Were they really doing this to me? Could there be another explanation? My heart wanted to believe there was, but my gut told me otherwise. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, watching the house, hoping for some sign that I was wrong. But nothing changed. Emily didn't leave. The lights inside the house flickered as they moved from room to room. I finally drove home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I was too numb. I knew what I had to do next. The truth was out there, and I needed to confront it. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of dread and determination swirling in my chest. I couldn't live in the dark anymore. Whatever Emily and Tom were doing, I had to face it head on. No more waiting. No more second-guessing myself. I didn't tell Emily I'd be working from home that day. I kissed her on the cheek as usual, wished her a good day at work, and watched her drive off. My stomach churned knowing I was about to destroy the facade of normalcy we'd been clinging to. Once she was gone, I grabbed my keys and headed straight to Tom's house. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel as I parked in his driveway. For a moment, I hesitated, staring at his front door. What was I even going to say? How was I going to say it? But then the image of their embrace flashed in my mind, and anger overtook my hesitation. I pounded on the door harder than I meant to. After a few seconds, Tom opened it, looking surprised and guilty. His face flushed the moment he saw me, and that was all the confirmation I needed. "Ryan," he started, but I didn't let him finish. "Don't you dare," I snapped, pushing past him into the house. Where is she? Is she here? Wait, hold on. Don't play games with me, Tom. Just tell me the truth. Are you screwing my wife? My voice cracked with emotion, a mix of rage and desperation. He raised his hands defensively, trying to calm me down. Ryan, stop. You've got it all wrong. Wrong! I laughed bitterly. I saw her here last night. I saw the way you hugged her. Don't you dare tell me I'm imagining things. Tom sighed and rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. Just sit down, man. Please. I'll explain everything. I'm not sitting down. Just tell me what the hell is going on. I could feel my heart racing, my fists clenched tightly at my sides. He gestured toward the couch. Ryan, I swear it's not what you think. Please let me explain. You're going to want to sit for this. Reluctantly, I perched on the edge of the couch, still ready to spring up and bolt if he said something that confirmed my worst fears. Tom sat across from me, his face pale and serious. Ryan, he began, his voice shaky. Emily's not cheating on you. She's been coming here because, well, there's no easy way to say this. You've been diagnosed with something serious. She didn't know how to tell you, and I've been trying to help her figure it out. For a moment, his words didn't register. What the hell are you talking about? Emily and I have been meeting with doctors and specialists, he continued. There's a clinic out of state she's been looking into. She wanted to find the best care before she told you. That's why she's been acting distant. I stared at him, frozen. You're lying. I'm not, Tom said firmly. Emily didn't want to stress you out until we had a plan. She asked me for help because she didn't want to face it alone. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to think or feel. All the anger, all the betrayal, it dissolved in an instant, leaving only confusion and a hollow ache in my chest. Ryan, Tom said softly, I know it looks bad, but everything we've been doing has been for you. The room spun as I tried to process what he was saying. Was this true? Had I been wrong all along? I stared at Tom, searching his face for any hint of deception. But there was none. He looked genuinely shaken, as if he'd been carrying the weight of this secret for far too long. What are you saying? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean I've been diagnosed? I feel fine. Tom exhaled deeply and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. A few months ago, Emily noticed you were more fatigued than usual. She said you mentioned some symptoms that worried her. Headaches, dizziness, even occasional numbness. She begged you to see a doctor, but you brushed it off, remember? I did. It had seemed so trivial at the time. I chalked it up to stress and overwork. So what happened? She scheduled a checkup for you without telling you. She spoke to the doctor, gave them a detailed description of what you'd been experiencing. They ran some preliminary tests using your existing records. Ryan, the results weren't good. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. What results? What's wrong with me? Tom hesitated, clearly reluctant to say the words. I'm not a doctor, man, but they suspect it's early onset multiple sclerosis. It's not confirmed yet. They need more tests, but Emily was terrified. She didn't know how to bring it up without scaring you. The words hit me like a freight train. MS. My mind reeled, grasping for something solid, some way to make sense of it all. Why didn't she just tell me? Why the lies, the secrecy? She wanted to, but she was scared, Tom said gently. She thought if she could find a specialist, a treatment plan, maybe even a second opinion, she could soften the blow. That's where I came in. She didn't want you to go through this alone, so she asked me to help. I stood up, pacing the room as anger and guilt waged war inside me. And you couldn't tell me either? You let me think. I thought you two were... I know, Tom said, his voice breaking. And I'm sorry, but this wasn't my secret to tell. Emily made me promise to keep it quiet until she was ready. I stopped pacing and turned to face him. So all this time, the late nights, the gym trips, the distance, it was all because of this? Tom nodded. She's been doing everything she can to find answers, Ryan. She loves you, man. She's been breaking her back, trying to hold it together. The weight of his words crashed down on me, suffocating and relentless. How had I misjudged everything so horribly? How could I have doubted her? I need to talk to her, I said, my voice cracking. I need to fix this. Tom stood and placed a hand on my shoulder. She'll understand, Ryan. Just be honest with her. Let her know you know. I nodded, though my chest felt tight with shame and regret. It was time to go home and face Emily. And this time, I had to let her know I trusted her, something I should have done all along. The drive home felt endless. My heart was a tangled mess of shame, fear, and guilt. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. How could I face Emily after everything I'd thought, everything I'd assumed? How could I tell her I had accused her, in my heart, of the worst kind of betrayal when she'd been trying to protect me? When I got home, I found her in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mixture of surprise and exhaustion. "Hey," she said softly, her voice tentative, as though she could sense something was coming. "Emily," I began, but my voice cracked. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We need to talk." She set the knife down, her hands trembling slightly. "Okay," she said, her tone wary. "What's going on?" I sat down at the table, gesturing for her to join me. "I know," I said quietly. Her brow furrowed. "Know what? About Tom, about the doctor, about me." The words felt heavy as they left my mouth, like they carried the weight of all the doubts and fears I'd been holding on to. Emily froze, her face going pale. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter," I said quickly. "What matters is that I know, and I'm so sorry. I let my suspicions get the better of me. I thought you and Tom were having an affair." Her eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. "No, Ryan, never. I would never do that to you." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "I know that now. I saw you with him, and I jumped to the worst possible conclusion. I should have trusted you. Instead, I let my fears take over, and I've been acting like a paranoid fool." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached across the table, taking my hands in hers. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I didn't mean to shut you out, but I was terrified. I didn't know how to tell you without making you panic. I thought if I could find answers first, maybe I could shield you from some of the fear." Her voice cracked, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "I just wanted to protect you." I squeezed her hands tightly, tears blurring my vision. "Emily, I don't care about the diagnosis right now. What matters is us. I should have been there for you, instead of doubting you. Can you forgive me?" She stood up and walked around the table, pulling me into a tight embrace. "There's nothing to forgive," she whispered. "We're in this together. Always." We held each other for what felt like forever, the weight of the last few months lifting off our shoulders. There was still so much to process, so much to face, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like we could handle it. "Together. We'll figure this out," I said, pulling back to look her in the eyes. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it." She nodded, her expression filled with determination and love. "Yes, together." I knew then that no matter what came next, we would be okay. We had each other, and that was enough. The days following our conversation were a blur of emotions. Emily and I spent hours talking about the diagnosis, the fear she'd been carrying, and the weight of the secret she'd tried to bear alone. For the first time in months, the walls between us were completely down. That night, I sat with her in our living room, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. "I don't want you to go through this alone anymore," I told her. "We're a team, Emily. We always have been. Please, let me carry some of this." She smiled, the tension in her face softening. "I didn't want you to see me as weak," she admitted. "I thought I had to hold it together for both of us." I reached for her hand. "You're the strongest person I know, but you don't have to do this alone. We're in this together, no matter what." The next morning, Emily and I visited the specialist she'd been working with. It was surreal, sitting in a doctor's office, hearing the words I never thought I'd hear: multiple sclerosis. The doctor explained the possible treatments, the lifestyle changes we'd need to make, and the prognosis. I wasn't in denial anymore. I was ready to face it head on. After the appointment, we sat in the car for a moment, letting the information sink in. Emily looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," I admitted, but not because of the diagnosis. "I'm scared of losing what we have, of letting fear get in the way of us." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "We're going to be okay," she said. "We have each other, and that's all that matters." That evening, I called Tom to apologize. He'd been nothing but a true friend, and I owed him my gratitude for being there for Emily when I hadn't. "I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions," I said, my voice heavy with guilt. "I let my fears cloud my judgment." "It's okay, man," Tom replied. "I get it. If the roles were reversed, I'd probably think the same thing. Just focus on getting through this with Emily. That's what matters." Hearing his forgiveness lifted a weight I didn't realize I was still carrying. I promised him I'd never doubt his loyalty again. That night, as Emily and I lay in bed, her head resting on my chest, I realized how much stronger we'd become through this ordeal. The fear and suspicion that had threatened to tear us apart had instead brought us closer. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, knowing we were facing the future together. There was a long road ahead, but with Emily by my side, I felt ready to take the first steps. The following days were about more than just facing the diagnosis. They were about rebuilding what had been damaged in our marriage. Emily and I made an unspoken agreement to prioritize honesty and communication, no matter how uncomfortable the conversations might be. One evening, as we sat on the couch, sipping tea and watching an old sitcom, I turned to her. "Emily, I need you to promise me something." She looked up, her brows furrowed in concern. "What is it?" "No more secrets. No matter how hard something feels, no matter how scared you are, we talk about it. Together." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I promise. I never wanted to hurt you, Ryan. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now how much it hurt you not knowing." I placed my hand on hers. "I get why you did it, but we're stronger together, and I need to know we're a team." She smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "We are. We always will be." That night marked a turning point. Emily and I began to focus on the small joys of life. Cooking dinner together, going for walks, laughing over silly things. We were determined to reclaim the connection we'd both feared was lost. Slowly but surely, we started to feel like ourselves again, like the couple we were before life's challenges began to weigh us down. The reality of the diagnosis loomed, but it no longer felt insurmountable. Emily and I worked together to adjust our lifestyle, simplifying our routines, incorporating healthier habits, and planning for regular doctor visits. The changes weren't easy, but having her by my side made them bearable. One afternoon, she came home with a stack of brochures from the clinic she'd been researching. "They have some incredible programs," she said, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "Physical therapy, support groups, even experimental treatments." I took the brochures from her and flipped through them. "Let's look into it all," I said. "Whatever it takes, we'll do it." Emily's face softened, and she reached for my hand. "Thank you for being so strong." I shook my head. "I'm only strong because I have you." We decided to attend a seminar at the clinic, eager to learn more about the resources available. It was the first time we publicly acknowledged the diagnosis, and while it felt daunting, it was also empowering. Sitting in that room with other couples who understood what we were going through reminded us that we weren't alone. As we worked through the emotional aftermath, I made it a point to repair my friendship with Tom. He had been there for Emily when I wasn't, and I owed him not only an apology but also my gratitude. We met for coffee one morning, the awkward tension between us palpable at first. "I owe you a huge apology," I began, staring into my mug. I jumped to conclusions and let my insecurities get the better of me. Tom leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Ryan, you don't have to keep apologizing. I get it. I just want you to know that everything Emily and I did was for you." "I know," I said. "And I can't thank you enough for being there for her when I wasn't." He nodded. "She loves you more than anything. You got a good one there. Don't let her go." "I won't," I promised, feeling a renewed sense of appreciation for the people in my life. With the air cleared, Tom and I began to rebuild our friendship. The trust would take time, but I knew we'd get there. Life settled into a strange, new normal. Emily and I spent our days adjusting to the reality of my diagnosis. It wasn't easy. There were nights when fear crept in, threatening to unravel the progress we'd made. But every time, Emily was there, holding me, grounding me with her quiet strength. We started attending appointments together. Hearing doctors discuss treatments, timelines, and uncertainties was daunting, but Emily never flinched. She took notes, asked questions, and made sure we left every session with a plan. One evening, as we sat reviewing the mountain of information we'd gathered, Emily placed her hand on mine. "Ryan," she said softly, "I need you to know something." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself for another difficult conversation. "No matter what happens, I'm here. I'll fight for you, for us, every step of the way." Her voice wavered, but her eyes were steady. I swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "You don't have to do this alone, Emily. We're in this together." She smiled through her tears. That's all I needed to hear. After weeks of processing the diagnosis privately, we knew it was time to share the news with family and close friends. The first person I wanted to tell was Tom. He'd been a pillar of support for Emily, and I felt he deserved to hear it directly from me. Over lunch, I broke the news. "I've been diagnosed with MS," I said, the words still feeling foreign on my tongue. Tom's expression shifted from shock to determination. "Whatever you need, man, I'm here. You know that, right?" I nodded. "You do. And I can't thank you enough for everything you've already done." We also decided to share the news with Emily's parents, who had always been close to us. Their initial shock gave way to concern and an outpouring of support. They promised to help in any way they could, whether it was driving me to appointments or simply being there when we needed them. Sharing the truth was both liberating and terrifying. It made everything feel more real, but it also brought us a network of people who were ready to rally around us. Through it all, Emily and I worked to rebuild the trust that had been shaken. For her, it meant opening up more, letting me see her fears and vulnerabilities. For me, it meant trusting her intentions completely and banishing the doubts that had once consumed me. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from our porch, I turned to her. "Emily, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Do you ever wish things were different? That you didn't have to deal with all this?" She looked at me, her eyes soft but resolute. "No, Ryan, I don't wish for a different life. I just wish for more time with you, no matter what that looks like." Her words stayed with me, a reminder of the strength and love that had carried us through the darkest times. As the weeks turned into months, Emily and I began to look ahead. We made plans, both big and small. A vacation we'd always dreamed of, home renovations to make life easier, even weekly date nights to keep the spark alive. Every step felt like a victory, a way of reclaiming our lives from the uncertainty that had once overshadowed everything. One night, as we lay in bed, Emily turned to me and whispered, "Do you remember what you said when you proposed to me?" I smiled. "I said I'd love you in the good times and the bad, no matter what." She nodded, her eyes glistening. And I said the same thing. I meant it then, and I mean it now. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. We had faced the storm, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, we were walking it together. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think.